Hello tanks and tankettes, and welcome to Patreon Supporter Spotlight number 48. We're going to kick this one off with this WZ120 game from Katia here, and as you can see from the minimap, this is a bit of a lemming train that's going on here on Fisherman's Bay right now. The vast majority of the team has come over to this flank, and so if they're going to have any chance of winning this game, they really need to push down this flank and try and wrest control of this side of the map, because if they don't, they're going to end up in a really awkward defensive position that isn't going to be tenable because there's artillery. Now their own team does have 3 and the enemy team only has 2, but even so, yeah, it's only going to take a couple of tanks spotting for any hope of defending to fall apart. So they have to go on the offensive basically if they want to try and retain control of what's going on this in this particular game. So they've pressed up a bit. Katia herself could have been maybe a little more aggressive. It was really the E50 and the CDC, or the E50s plural, going forwards that prompted the rest to go forwards. But I mean, she's, you know, kept pace at least and is getting some damage done. Although you won't be able to tell quite how much until the very end, because this is a 917 game played on the 917.1 client, and if you've watched other videos where that was the case, you'll know that it disappears parts of the UI, because I think there was a software change in the client with some of the UI elements. Anyway, so she's just looking for targets for opportunity, trying to stay hull down, because the the turret on this thing is not half bad. It's also got a pretty good gun, but not a lot of gun depression, so she can work with the terrain here, but it does limit you somewhat in the Chinese mediums, and some of the Russian mediums as well, of course, that lack of gun depression. So they've moved up and they're sweeping these tanks up quite nicely. They've got a pretty good numerical advantage here, and they're just dismantling the defenders. But that's what's needed. That's what they needed to happen, basically. Otherwise, they were going to be in serious trouble. Of course, the downside of all this is that the 2 tanks that went to the 890 line just got completely outnumbered and overwhelmed. And personally, if I were in the position of those 2 tanks, well, I wouldn't have even bothered. There's just no point under these circumstances trying to do that, because there's no way you're going to hold on, because there's no one to back you up. So Katia's pressed forward, but unfortunately gets caught in the side by that Scorpion, who retreated down the centre road there. We also know that there's a couple of defenders over that raised road to the south, along with artillery, and oh, a T-30. Well, that's nasty. Depends what gun they have, of course. If it's the 120mm, it's the rate of fire you have to worry about rather than the Alpha, but in this case it's going to be the big gun, the 155, and a hit from that is going to really hurt. Now at this point Katia kind of messes up. She's obviously, you know, trying to stick with the sidearm in this thing and not get too far around, but yeah, you'd rather take a hit from the IS or the IS-2 than the T-30, who even high rolled. So that was unpleasant and cost her rather a lot of health. Fortunately, however, facing the IS and the IS-2 with the front armour, she's able to bounce a shot, but then she makes the fatal mistake of giving a side armour to the IS, who fully grasps the opportunity and knocks her out. But by this stage it doesn't really matter, because they're going to cap out for the win. It's a bit of a messy victory, but I think if you're in the position Katia was in, with having done, as it's going to turn out, a fairly reasonable amount of damage, you would just want the win, even though capping is rarely the best way to go about winning. But in this case, it was the way to guarantee winning, even though it meant their own team didn't get particularly good XP out of it, because there were still enough hit points left, there were enough tanks left on the enemy team to subtract from what they might have otherwise gained. But overall, that wasn't a bad 5, almost 6 minutes done, and it just goes to show that the gun on this thing's pretty nice. Next up, we have another tier 9, the E50, and this time it's driven by Game Glitch. This is another older replay. This is one from the archive of games that I've been sent. and it looks a bit different these days. I think the E50 is in HD now, if I remember correctly, but it's still just as capable as it ever was, and we're going to get to see some of that in action. Now, this particular matchup, it's very good matchmaking. I mean, it is a tier 10 game, but it's basically top tier mediums on each side. There's not a lot of heavies. So on this map, having mobility and having a good gun is going to come in very, very useful. And of course, the E50's also got a not insignificant amount of armour to work with, although you're not going to want to rely on it too heavily. It's not a medium, it is medium, it's not a heavy tank by any means, but just occasionally, you know, you will get useful bounces. So all of the mediums and the lights basically came to this side, apart from the Leo 1, which is on the beach. They did have a pair of heavies in the form of an M103 and a Conqueror as well, but the M103 is alone and is about to die to the Object 140, who also killed the Conqueror, so they've just lost their only heavies essentially, although the M103 did at least take the enemy IS-3 with them. So at the moment they have a numerical advantage. They also have more arty than the enemy team, but they're kind of falling into the trap of, well, having cleared up that flank, they're now pushing. And sometimes you've got momentum and sometimes you can push through, but in this case, on this particular map, it means pushing into some quite easily defensible positions. That shot, by the way, that must have been a misclick, because obviously there wasn't anything to fire at quite then, so I have no idea. Game Glitch himself has come over, however, to this side to try and get some flanking fire in on those mediums. But one of the 140s has obviously taken note that he's here. He's taken a hit already. And as there is artillery, he can't afford to hang around here forever. The longer he does, the greater the chance that one of those enemy arties will take notice. And of course, that 140 hasn't forgotten that he's here. So, although it's not in theory a bad position, and he has actually managed to do a little bit of damage from there, he decides to reposition, and I think he does so because he's noticed that the mediums, the survivors of the tanks that tried to push on the 890 line, are now trying to fall back, and all that's left of the tanks that were on that side are an STB-1 and a Batchat. And the Batchat is in trouble. They must be reloading at this point, and they are trying to make a getaway. But yeah, when you're in a Batchat, really all you've got are your hit points, and those are rather rapidly running out. The STB is at least in that that field in the middle, so artillery is the only immediate danger. But the 140s, the mediums themselves, basically fall prey to the same trap that Game Glitch's teammates did. I mean, I think Game Glitch's teammates did actually do some damage pushing around like that, but they eventually got picked apart by the defenders. But those mediums were, I mean, maybe hoping to make a counter push, but between Game Glitch and the Scorpion repositioning, and of course the STB still being alive, that's just basically cost them their top tier mediums. So this is back in their favour at this moment, at this particular point. But it would be easy to maybe, you know, be overconfident. But they do have the Leo 1, who's been, I mean, they've taken out one tank, but they've been on the beach for most of it. So I don't think the Leo 1's been that useful. But they are now providing spotting and a distraction for the enemy team, although they've got themselves into a position where they're going to die. But because the remaining enemy tanks have all turned around to deal with the Leo, this gives Game Glitch and the Scorpion the perfect opportunity to move up. And they've also got still an artillery advantage. And talking of artillery, it's the remaining enemy arty, the Lorraine, and there we go. So it's just 3 enemy tanks left now, and they can afford to play this cautiously. They can afford to just spot and let their arty take out the tanks that they're spotting, as that has just happened to that poor unfortunate Waffle-Panzer IV. So it's just the CDC and the Borsig. I don't know why I blanked on that name, but anyway. And so as they both have absolutely terrible armour, as you can see, Game Glitch has loaded up the HE. I think he was hoping to go for a ram as well, but sadly got tracked. Although having taken that Borsig shot in the tracks meant that they didn't actually take any damage. So that does leave the CDC. Now, unfortunately, because this is an older game, it doesn't have his repair kit. It's been used already, so that track cost him a bit more damage, but did not ultimately cost him his tank, because the Scorpion G turned up to save the day. So that was a Confederate and a high caliber and a first class out of that, and it's going to be a pretty nice result overall. In fact, I think it's actually more damage than the previous game, the WZ. There we go, nearly 5,000 damage done, 1,300 base XP. So yeah, that was pretty good, and there was some nice teamwork going on in that one as well. Although looking back at replays like this, I can say I don't miss old artillery. You know, sometimes having artillery on your side could be useful, but it always meant that there were artillery, equal artillery on the other side, more or less. So yeah, no, don't miss old artillery at all. But the E-50 is still pretty nice, though. So lastly, we have some warships, and this is going to be Lo Squalo in the Leningrad, which is the absolute must-have premium if you like to go very, very fast, because it is one of the fastest ships in the game. I think it's joint fastest with the Khabarovsk, I believe. I think they have both the same. It's like a 43 knot top speed, something like that, and that's without, you know, flags or a speed booster. So this thing is pretty much, you know, the speediest of speed demons. And the Soviet destroyers generally are quite fast, and it sort of makes up for some of their other deficiencies, because in warships, having that amount of speed available represents a huge amount of flexibility. And because this is a premium Russian destroyer, it doesn't have those horrible short-range torpedoes to contend with. It doesn't have to rely on only its guns. It's actually got usable 8-kilometer torps. It can only just about stealth drop. I think you get, was it like 1 kilometer and a bit if you've gone for full stealth spec, and because it's tier 7 you can't mount a concealment module, but with the captain's skill and camo I think you can get it to something like 6.8. I might be wrong about that figure, though. That's just purely off the top of my head. But yeah, it's always been a bit of a peculiarity that the Soviet premium destroyers have better torpedoes. You know, the Gremyashi is exactly the same. It's just, I don't know, it's odd that they just have so much more utility than their regular line counterparts. But I suppose that's there to increase their attractiveness. So this is a game with a carrier, which is never particularly fun. There are tier 6 carriers, which is not so much an issue itself. I think it's, an independence on each side. But it's more the case that air spotting can be very, very annoying. And so, although that's not really an issue right now, Lo Squalo is going to have to keep a close eye on what the enemy planes are doing. So more torps out on this Nuremberg, and he has been spotted, and so he puts down smoke to break contact. I don't think he's intending to sit in this smoke, not moving at that speed. Sometimes you end up just like, it can feel almost like wasting a smoke, but sometimes you do need to just break contact, even though it is at the cost of a smoke. But in this case, I think ultimately it wasn't really necessary. I mean, that Nuremberg was going down anyway, and then Lo Squalo just happened to catch him with that torp for the last couple of 1,000 hit points, so that's not bad. Now this is a case where the speed comes in useful. I mean, the Fiji smoke is just going as he gets to the island, but in another destroyer he'd have been rather further away, and so he's able to get there and drop his torps. And even though they know he's there, they're going to know the torps are out in the water, they will have less time to react. So rather than stick around and get into a close range gunfight with a Fiji or a Colorado, and there we go, 3 torp hits, not bad, he's pulling back and taking the opportunity to just take some cheeky shots at some passing cruisers. And this is again where the speed comes in very nice, because it can be difficult for people to estimate quite how fast you're going, especially if you're using a speed boost, and so it can be really, really easy to end up underleading your shots. And this is part of what makes something like the Khabarovsk such a capable gunboat at tier 10, is just its sheer speed and the ability to kite and to throw people's shots off very easily. So Lasqualo spotted this Bayern doing a very silly thing, and he's able to just execute a fairly flawless ambush. I mean, he might take some damage from the Bayern, but this guy was dead the moment he decided that going between that little gap between the islands was a good plan. I don't know why they were trying to rush the cap. That was just a bad plan. But as it was, well, that's just a whole chunk of hit points for Lasqualo with a relatively small amount of risk. The other side, however, has collapsed, which is not so good. I mean, they do have, what is it, a Fiji up on the A line, desperately trying to stay alive, and the carrier is going to be concentrating on that part too. And there's a Scharnhorst that is now heading in that direction. But yeah, this is not a great looking mini-map right now. They're behind on ships, they're behind on points, and because this is a standard game, it really comes down to the kills in terms of getting points. Lasqualo's going to have to watch he doesn't run aground here though. There is an island right ahead of him, and sometimes it's possible to do that. You get so intent on trying to fight an enemy, you know, make sure your shots are lined up, or trying to, you know, get in position to make a torp drop, that you don't realise that there's an island right in your path. But fortunately in this case, Lasqualo did realise, because running aground in front of the guns of that mast would have been a bad plan. So that's a whole heap of enemy ships that are pushing around from the eastern flank, and I think he just figured he'd go for it and rely on the ability to dodge. Once again, putting down smoke though, I'd have maybe tried to drop the smoke to use here myself, and I mean he's done it to break contact, and he is actually slowing down, but he's going to slide out of it basically. However, fortunately, the planes are far away enough to not pick him up when he's firing, and so even though he's just slid out of the smoke, you know, this was an a very imperfect smoke drop. Fortunately, just the edge of the smoke is actually obscuring him, so he was able to keep firing regardless. So with that enemy Leander smoking up and the planes not being anywhere close, there's not particularly great spotting right now, and then their own Fiji decides to smoke up as well. So really, this is awkward. This is one of those times when you've got your smoke down and you think, yeah, I could just sit here and fire at things over and over, except then nobody's spotting, and it just becomes a slightly wasted exercise. But fortunately, however, it was not entirely fruitless, because the fire he set on the Leander burned them out. So that just leaves a Pensacola, which is actually, you know, in a destroyer you can't be I know it has not a great reputation, but you can't afford to underestimate those 8-inch guns, so he's got to be careful here. And there's also a Koenig, which is further back, and it looks like the destroyer was heading up on this side as well. So destroyer, carrier, why did I say that? I don't know. It's so difficult to tell the difference between a destroyer and a carrier, you guys. They're such similar ships. Yeah. So there's a chance that I might be able to go after the carrier. There's also a Fuso left, and there we go. There goes that Pensacola, up to 100k damage now, which just leaves the Koenig alone. Yeah, there is a Fuso, but the Fuso's heading back to their own cap, possibly to try and defend against the Graf Spee and the Bayern. But it looks like only the Graf Spee is really going towards the cap, because the Bayern's coming back this way now, and I'm not entirely sure why, because the Bayern's such a slow ship that the fact that they've committed to that flank, and now they're trying to pull back to the other side, it's a, yeah, I don't know if they just changed their mind. I mean, I guess they did, but it's a very poor time to do it, because they're basically not really going to get back in time to do a huge amount. Although the Koenig might now be coming into the firing line of the Bayern from where they are. So Lasqualo's bumped into the border. I don't think it was intentional. They were just trying to manoeuvre, and suddenly there the border was, but you'd rather do that with the border than an island. The Fiji went down in the meantime, but the Scharnhorst is still alive and kicking, and so they've turned this around rather nicely, and sitting at 4 kills, Lasqualo's actually got the chance of a Kraken medal, which would be rather nice. So with the Bayern spotting and the Cunning's attention on the Bayern, presumably, the Squalo is free to just hit him over and over and try and set a fire. And lo and behold, we've spotted the Independence as well, which could be very nice indeed. There's very little chance this Independence can run away at this point, basically. The Fuso, like the Graf Spee actually came back, having said what I said about the Bayern. The Graf Spee's come all the way back as well, which is probably sensible because you don't want to face a Fuso alone on a Graf Spee necessarily. Yeah, it means that Fuso has gone all the way down south to defend and didn't need to, which leaves the carrier completely alone and undefended, which is very nice for Squalo. Although I think he'd quite like to, he's thinking about trying to maybe steal that kill. As it turns out, he doesn't have to, however, because the fire he set actually got him the kill. So yeah, that wasn't too bad. So that's 5 kills. He's now got a chance at another one. He's getting pretty close before he uses the torps. Even at close range, it's possible for a carrier to dodge. Less so for the high tier carriers. Where the low and mid tier, the carriers are still, you know, they've got enough maneuverability that if you drop your torps too early, unless you predict their movements well, it's not going to, you know, be a guaranteed thing. And in this case, only 2 of the torps hit, but it's enough damage that it's only another couple of shots to actually finish them off and get a devastating strike in the process. In fact, that's his second devastating strike. So that just leaves this Fuso all alone, and they're very, very healthy as well. So this could be get more hit points, and if he gets the kill, well, that would just be icing on the cake. 7 out of 12 kills, that's not half bad if he manages to get it. But even if he doesn't, he's now up to over 150,000 damage, and because this is a premium, that's going to translate to quite a lot of profit. So a bit of a risky moment there, but fortunately RNG's, you know, he loses some health, but RNG's saves the bacon, saves his bacon, even in terms of not just getting completely annihilated. And once again, closing the distance before he drops the torpedoes, and he also uses his last smoke to try and break contact, although it's a little bit iffy, but it's fine because like the reload, even though the reload on the Fuso is good, it wasn't going to be good enough to reacquire the Fuso. And again, once again, even the torpedoes don't quite finish the job, but the gunfire does. So that was, in fact, 7 kills. He had Kraken, Confederate, 2 double strikes, and a high caliber with 181,000 damage done and 2,356 base XP. He killed over half the enemy team. There were 1 or 2 kill secures in there, but for the most part, you know, he was not skimping in terms of the damage done. And actually, maybe somewhat unusually for a Soviet destroyer, the bulk of the damage done was with torpedoes. So this is why the Leningrad is such a good ship. It's fast, it gets usable torpedoes, and it gets those Soviet guns. So over 600,000 credits profit. He also apparently spent some... he must have been buying some of the consumables with doubloons, which is not a usual thing, but anyway, you know, in that game he could have well afforded to do it with credits, but I suppose if you want to do it that way, you will of course increase the amount of credits you're making per game, and if you're grinding for credits particularly, then that could be a way to do it. But overall, yeah, I thought that was a very impressive Leningrad game, and it's just a nice ship, it really is. So that's it for Supporter Spotlight number 48. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. And if you have, you can hit the like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.